Now, it's not just about shopping, of course. It's about what is being made and sold. It's about, you know, databases that suggest things to happen, which will happen. It's about, you know, what's going on behind this whole world of algorithm software and things we want to have. So he invited Scott Smith of Changeist, who is a futurist, if you can say, but he's somebody who you know, works with big brands and big companies to find out where things are going, but also to design new experiences. He had a look for us at, you know, the hidden world of shopping, and his talk is therefore called Invisible Retail. Scott Smith.
Thank you. Let me get things set up and try to make this a little bit invisible for a moment. We'll see how well Apple behaves here. It's lovely to be back at Next again this year. I had a wonderful time last year. Some of the topics I'll be talking about today are kind of an extension of where I was headed last year, if you sort of heard any of that. And you know, Monique sort of pointed out this. Laurent pointed to a lot of these issues. You know, what does the world of kind of data actually do to the sort of experiences that we have? So for the last decade, as Monique mentioned, or almost the last decade, Changeist, my company, has helped organizations essentially make sense of complex trends in technology and business and culture, but also try to envision different ways that these play out. We've had a lot of talks in the last day and a half about trends that are happening now, things that are sort of just beginning to emerge, and it's always difficult to kind of talk about the future of the future, because we've just seen one snapshot of a very near future, but to think a little bit, sort of be a bit more speculative and a little bit more philosophical, and it's kind of where I want to go. So, first thing, we need Keynote to actually work. Let's see if we can get this running again. Amazingly crashy. Talk about experiences. About 4 months ago, I started disappearing. I may not look like it right now, but I started disappearing. I basically started disappearing from the US. I've been in the process of a long, gradual move back to Europe, was here a decade ago, and have sort of come back in the past week, officially based in Amsterdam. But for the last 11 years, I've basically made my residence, my official residence in the US. And that means a lot of things, particularly that kind of become apparent when you start to kind of move between countries or between, in particular, kind of commerce ecosystems. This wasn't in response to a kind of scandal or witness protection program, I wish. But it was basically a response to a sort of steady shift in work that I do from west to east. But in the process of that move, it wasn't one sort of single pick up and drop, more of a kind of long, slow evolution. My wife will tell you sort of painful, long, slow evolution. But in the process of that, as I started to kind of disappear from the US market, my purchasing cycles slowed down. The retailers that I frequented that are walking distance or a quick drive from my house began to see me less and less. People who worked behind the cash register would sort of ask me when I came back, "Where have you been? You were here every Monday for 2 months and then suddenly you've disappeared." They knew what I bought on a weekly basis, the kind of food that I was buying, if I was stocking up on supplies. And I started sort of appearing less and less in the databases of those companies, and gradually sort of leaving less and less of a footprint in my home. And I've talked about cutting off Amazon Prime yesterday. Effectively, I've disappeared from Amazon Prime. Had it for a year, and now basically I've stopped. They don't know why. I still kind of on the site searching for things, but I'm no longer buying because I'm in a different sort of geopolitical and economic jurisdiction, and that doesn't really work. I left my local supermarket. I left the Best Buy, the big box electronics retailer. And I probably stranded a whole small city's worth of low-cost electronics companies, vendors of Spanish cheeses, sellers of special sneakers. All of those poor people that relied on my existence have to go find somebody else now. And in those 11 years that I was back, I started leaving more and more of a trail of actions. And not just actions, not just purchases, not just credit card swipes, but intentions, interests, curiosities, things that I was searching for, things that I was roaming the shelves looking at, Things that in the last few years, some of the systems that Laurent pointed out were starting to kind of look back at me. Suddenly this person's showing up on film and then they're disappearing again. They're showing up in a database, they're disappearing again. Product categories that I was interested in, all of those sort of data points just begin to sort of trail off. So from the point of view of retailers, financial services, from my bank, who is very confused still as to what I could possibly be doing outside the country and why I'm traveling, and continue to cut off my payment card over and over again, even though I've tried to explain to them that there's something outside the US. Logistics companies, true story, explained to them what a chip card was. But anyway, I'm basically sort of a cloud of often fuzzy data points that has been slowly kind of evaporating over time. And in this move, I sort of left behind a ghost, an empty shell of data. Hibernating credit cards that haven't been cut off, bank accounts that still exist, because I still run a company in 2 different jurisdictions in 2 countries. CCTV cameras that are probably quite lonely because they no longer see me coming. Data systems that can no longer track me, and somewhere my data doppelganger is just sitting there like an old suit hanging in a closet. It's probably out there somewhere shopping without me. It could be inhabited by someone from another country who's basically kind of taken over my persona. These things happen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's kind of my side of the transaction. But what's been happening on the other side of the transaction? Laurent pointed out sort of the perennial argument for the past decade or so about online, offline. I started working in e-commerce in 1993 or 94 before we actually knew what it was. And this has kind of been the argument all of this time. Is it going to be the online model? Is it going to replace the brick and mortar model? In the last few years, the word of panic has been multi-channel. How do we sort of do everything? How do we do omni-channel? But really, for the past few decades, physical retail has been slowly evaporating too, like me. It's been gradually disappearing. Of course, Sears introduced the catalog business in the early 1900s. More recently, in the past few decades, you've had companies like Argos, if you have been in the UK, you may be familiar with. These sorts of stores that basically don't actually keep stock on shelves for you to buy, but have representative models of things for you to go in and purchase. All of the stock is held in a warehouse in the back. You order a catalog online, phone order, but you go into essentially the kind of representation, a Potemkin village of a store, and pick something up. Digitization has essentially accelerated this. Phone, the TV, the internet, mobile, now physical computing and digitized supply chains, which are kind of the hidden element in all of this, have accelerated this, but also our own behaviors. We're no longer. I mean, I can remember a time when I was shopping in a catalog, or my parents did, or going into one of these older stores. But essentially, if you're under the age of about 45 or 40, you become accustomed to the constantly sort of churning new business models showing up. And these generations that are used to these changing business models and novelty and convenience come to expect it. In 2001, Apple sort of did something that seemed quite revolutionary. Now it seems actually kind of dingy. If you go into an older Apple store, it seems kind of hacked, sort of tropey. But Apple opened up the first one of its stores in Tysons Corner, Virginia, not far from where I had been living, and brought this kind of digital physical environment together. They basically kind of emptied the store out and built this hygienic, clean space that was meant to be something of a mimic of the online experience, the Mac, the Apple experience of clean lines, no clutter, no mess. And other companies have sort of come along and copied them. If you look at any retailer's quarterly conference calls, they'll talk about how they want to be like the Apple Store. That's what they want. Everyone wants to hire the person who designed the Apple Store, or everyone wants to hire somebody who designed a store that looks like the Apple Store, and so you get these clones. Argos went from being those kind of clunky high street shops now to opening up something that effectively looks like this. But as you can see, the traditional experience of going into a store and picking things up from a shelf and interacting with people and seeing your neighbor there in the same aisle, knowing people who are there, them knowing what your interests are, coming from the back, from the stock room with a product that you might like. All of those things start to kind of disappear in the leading edge of this model. You can look at this kind of example that Laurent showed of the Tesco's in South Korea as, here's an interesting kind of model of using both mobile and physical space to order. But if you kind of step back and think about it for a minute, this is a little bit freaky. You've got people, it's almost kind of like a picture book with a child. You've got people kind of going up to the picture of a product on the picture of a shelf and recognizing this affordance, this sort of illustration or representation of a retail store a thing that kind of caught my attention a couple of months ago was, if you've heard of David Chang's, a very well-known chef, runs Momofuku in New York and other cities, essentially opened a new restaurant in New York City. But he didn't actually open a restaurant. Now, this is not a shop or retail store, for example, but it sells things, and it sells things to people, and it has a menu that you order off of. But effectively, the kind of business model was to open a restaurant that's not a restaurant at all, but it's basically just the kitchen, the front end, the menu, the product selection, and also, importantly, the kind of delivery experience. But in effect, there's no there. Maple is the name of this place, is effectively a kind of dematerialized, invisible commerce model. It lives in the kind of back office or inside of a building somewhere, but people don't ever really actually walk into the front door and confront the chef or talk to the maitre d' or the host or interact with the waiter. This is all happening in physical space, but it's happening in physical space that's actually distributed across a lot of different locations. This is Apple's newest store that just opened in Brussels. It's the first one that Johnny Ive actually had kind of full design control of it. And what is this if this is not kind of the ghost of retail? If you've been to a big metropolitan Apple store, one of the newer ones that have been opened, what do you kind of encounter? You encounter open space. The product is completely pushed back to the walls. You've got some sort of representations of devices on tables, but it's mostly people in a kind of temple-like environment. A church, this kind of haunted by technology saints. How is this any different than a sort of cathedral, almost kind of going through the manifestation of a behavior of shopping, of continuing to kind of pray to these retail gods, but in effect there's nothing there anymore. It's a physical vessel for an invisible ideal. It's full of beacons that detect you when you come into the store. Most people are beginning to shop online and just go to pick up the product there. They're going to kind of breathe Apple air. But not actually, really interact with people. The geniuses, in most of my experiences, are kind of, their behavior seems designed to actually keep you away from having any kind of physical retail interaction. They act like altar boys. So you walk in as a kind of proxy for your data spirit, you interact and you leave. And if your product dies, you take it back and they pull its soul out and they move it and keep it safe for a while in a hard drive and they move it to another product. But this is a kind of like, ghostly evaporation of commerce. So what is a store anyway? More and more, a store is actually not a store at all. It's not a physical structure. It's the information about the product sets. It's the information about your interactions. It's the information about you. But it's more the ability to model your behavior, create a sort of predictive model from that, and then deliver something that you like. What did you do last summer? Well, probably the big supermarket that you go to knows what you did last summer. They knows that you had a cookout for your friends and you bought this many sausages and this amount of beer and these other kind of accoutrements and had this party, and maybe you've done this a couple of years in a row, so maybe you start to get a specialized coupon in the summertime that says, hey, come down and actually do what you did again last summer. And in effect, retailers are kind of becoming like this butler, the figure, if you've seen the film Gosford Park, you'll know Helen Mirren's character, Mrs. Wilson. And she has a speech at the end of this film where she says, someone sort of asks her why she does what she does, why does she serve, why does she sort of, basically live in the bottom of this, beautiful country house, but always kind of work these grinding days to help other people. And she says, a good servant basically has the ability to anticipate what people want, the ability to know before you're hungry, to know before you're sleepy, and actually have those things waiting there for you. So increasingly, retail and commerce is starting to sort of take on this Mrs. Wilson model of anticipating things for you, delivering them to you, and not necessarily in the sort of traditional structural format that you're familiar with. You can play Dash Bingo now, because I think most talks have actually put a picture of Dash up on the screen. But it's surprisingly punching above its weight for a product that's not in a lot of homes right now. And there was a lot of kind of noise and confusion about it when it was launched, but brands are both excited and scared about this. The fact that you can actually take away the sort of relationships and affordances that those brands and consumer products have relied on for decades. The relationship with the retailer, the channel purchase, the advertising contract and relationship, the space that they get on the end of the shelf if they're kind of paying more in a premier product. These consumer packaged goods that we buy consistently over a lifetime play really well with this kind of affordance so far, but we're not really sure how people are going to behave with it. But it also strips away a lot of the normal habitat that a consumable product uses. But of course, it still leaves what's happening on the back end, the invisibility. That dash button is one simple button with a product on it, but you push that button and you effectively trigger an entire global supply chain. If you have a child, and if you're a customer of Amazon somewhere in this world, and probably in several places, there are warehouses full of nappies that are sitting there waiting for you, or waiting for your child, or waiting for your child to do what it does. But they have your name on it, so it's just not evenly distributed. These nappies are kind of spread out across the world. They're sitting in warehouses waiting for you to push that button, which means, of course, if you believe the old sort of database anecdote, that there's also a warehouse of beer sitting somewhere waiting for you, because if you're purchasing nappies, probably you're purchasing beer as well, as the data scientists will show you. So that beautiful, elegant, little tiny front end that seems to represent nothing is actually the trigger to this massive kind of global supply chain that rolls into motion. But it's not just the button, it's other things that are starting to kind of show up in our lives. You may recognize the Amazon Echo. This is a device that is available. It can sit in your kitchen, your living room, your bedroom, if you're creepy, and it basically has a voice that can respond to you. You can ask it questions, kind of like Siri. It can respond to you. It can facilitate shopping. But they've also basically kind of wrapped the voice of this service into an SDK, into a development kit, and it can now be inserted into other devices. So we now have the ability to create multiple shopping touch points, sitting around your house, kind of carrying on with you like a friendly member of the family, laughing at your jokes, helping your kids with their homework, singing you to sleep, whatever it is you like, waking you up in the morning if you're lonely. But we have these voice-activated TVs, smart home hubs, smart home devices, a plethora of connected devices that are increasingly kind of sitting around the household, looking, listening, trying to understand how we behave, the things that we want, what our needs are. It's like Mrs. Wilson again. They're the ultimate servants that are beginning to kind of learn who we are, what we want, how we kind of behave on a moment-to-moment basis. All of those things that advertisers and products and brands would have killed for, and probably still would today. So whether it's Apple, Siri, Chrome, Cortana, etc., lots of little microphones, cameras, things sort of around the household. You may have seen this app from a company called Ditto Labs. Actually, it's not an app, it's a service that can go through and scan Instagram feeds and identify individual brands that are present in those pictures. So if you happen to be taking a picture out one night, maybe it's tonight, and you're out with friends and you're smiling with your beers, it's not really looking at the overall picture, it's looking for the logo of the beer, and it's looking for your smile, and correlating the two of those things to find out what you like, what makes you smile, what makes you happy, what do you enjoy with friends. Those innocent Instagram photos that you're posting are kind of becoming fodder to be scanned for this, these intentions. Obviously, your Google searches, the whole idea of Google is not necessarily to kind of give you a search response, it's to learn from your interactions with it. It's actually kind of the reverse of the way most people think about the way that Google actually works. An interesting story recently, you may have seen Google Sunroof is a new project that they've launched for a couple of cities in the US to give people information on how much it would cost to put solar panels on the roof of their house. And they arrived at this as a kind of interesting need by one of the engineers, apocryphally, looking at the local database searches, the local Google searches that were happening in Boston in particular, and I think Portland as well, perhaps, and identified that people were actually trying to kind of work this problem out. They were trying to figure out how to buy a thing. How much is it going to cost? Where do I get it? How complex is it? And so by taking those kind of on-the-fly, just-in-time search queries, they were able to configure quite quickly the data that's needed to pull the retailers, the pricing, the financing, the delivery, the installation together, and have that product out there available for you. Now think about the implications of this, being able to take individual, momentary, or kind of surging, trending Google searches and rapidly configure the ability to make a purchase around those and actually deliver those things to you. We no longer need a store, a big dealership, or a retail store that sells you solar panels. It's something that's sort of even beyond a pop-up store. If you've got next generation TVs, cameras in your home, being able to actually sort of look at you as you're sitting and binge watching your favorite TV show, see where you're laughing, smiling, crying, see which commercials you're responding to, when you lick your lips when the cake commercial comes on, or what conversation's happening when the wine commercial comes on TV. The ability to actually kind of look at you on the other side of that screen and the analytics that are sort of possible to determine your age, your gender, your possible kind of income levels, who's in the house, who's in the room at the time, who watches TV at what time of day. All of these things are not only inevitable, but actually quite imminent today. If you go out and start to kind of look for these technology companies, there's dozens of them sitting very kind of quietly in the background, stepping up to serve retailers and to work with electronic companies and channel partners. And even beyond that, kind of sitting in the background with the data itself, things like Google Prediction API, the ability to actually make machine learning accessible and on tap, to take any retailer who can plug into Google or Amazon, for this fact, and not have to have the millions and millions and millions of dollars or euros that it would take to invest in machine learning, but they can effectively tap machine learning as a service. And they're selling it as a prediction API, as a prediction service. How many tens of thousands of predictions about your customer's behavior would you like to purchase on a daily basis? This is the kind of language through which these kind of prediction APIs are marketed. And again, this is a central part of the retail experience, the understanding between the retailer and the individual, and all the analytics that have kind of sat in between for decades, beginning to kind of collapse into the single interaction between a machine learning database in the cloud, the retailer, and all of the sort of touch points that you have with it. Are people really comfortable with this? Are you comfortable with this idea that somehow something in your home might actually kind of hear you or detect your searches and proactively deliver a product to you? Quiet. A survey was done recently by Cass Sunstein, who's actually kind of the godfather of behavioral economics and nudge theory, for better or worse. They released some of the information, some of the data points from this survey. 41%, and this is done in the US, 41% of people that he surveyed would voluntarily enroll in a program where algorithms determine what you want to read, make book selections on your behalf, bill your credit card in the process in the background, send the book to you, and allow you to opt out later. So not just have you go to Amazon and say, I'm looking for this book, but the book just appears one day and you think, oh, I thought I kind of want to read that. I wonder how they knew that. 31% said that they would approve of hypothetical smart homes designed to automatically determine when residents run out of a staple good, like toilet paper or soap, and deliver it on their behalf without explicit consent. And to get an idea of generational differences, these numbers really jumped when they talked to university students. 70% approved of automatic purchases by a home monitor even without consent. Replacing mother and having these sort of the shelves refilled and the products there when you want them. As was talked about earlier this morning, a lot of companies are gearing up for this, but not necessarily retail companies. Apple ramping up its hiring of machine learning experts to be able to predict your needs. Why would they want to do that if it's not to get beyond the types of product sets that they're already delivering? Alibaba, Baidu, a lot of investment happening in the Asian market in AI that sort of mirrors what's happening in the US, but again, sort of not with the legacy of decades and decades of retail to have to step over. Facebook, as Laurent mentioned, launched M last week or the week before, and this is actually a quote from the product manager himself. In-app ads, in-app payments, transactions beginning to happen within instant messaging. And he basically said, we're capturing all of your intent for the things you want to do. That is present in the chat messages that you're exchanging over these various instant messaging platforms. Intent often leads to buying something or to a transaction, and that's an opportunity for us to make money over time. By listening, by kind of keeping an ear out and monitoring the conversations that are going between you and someone else, so when you say, gosh, I really could, I wish I had a pizza tonight, you suddenly get the ability to actually execute that transaction. And when you start to take this into things like smartwatches, chat applications, et cetera, this really begins to get kind of stranger and stranger and more dematerialized. Just some quick data points. I talked a moment ago about generational kind of differences in this. The younger you get, the more the expectation of 1 or 2 day delivery becomes part of an overall transaction experience. This is something that younger generations, younger consumer cohorts have grown up with and expect. The idea of a 30-minute delivery where something is actually kind of showing up at your house, you hear a buzzing overhead, you hear a plop in the backyard, the back garden, you go out and find that your little Amazon crate actually has the product that you thought about, but maybe you didn't order. Strange new vehicles beginning to kind of buzz around your neighborhood. Boats, bikes, buses, delivery cars, delivery vehicles, new ways of actually both using manned and autonomous delivery vehicles to get you these products. These kinds of people knocking on your door and saying, here's your package, and just sort of handing it off to you. The idea of sort of using, adding a layer of delivery and couriers on top of people who are already moving, traveling, going from point to point. Zipments, Friendshipper, these sorts of organizations, using downtime or excess space to move products. And then, of course, these jaunty fellows might in a few years just rock up to your front door, a hatch opens, out comes the product, and off they trot down the street. And in a way, how is this any different than, say, the 1890s, except you're not feeding this thing hay? And then, possibly even weirder, this kind of idea of quantum commerce that Amazon has this patent that they haven't fully kind of executed on yet, but that the idea is it will anticipate delivery of a product to your home, pre-position it in a depot or in a sort of warehouse close to you, and then when the moment's right, actually move it that last mile, because that's the complicated piece, right? Getting it from its origin point to you. So if it can anticipate the kinds of things that you're interested in, push them out to the edge of the network closer to you, and actually have it available when you really want it, that's fantastic. Just a brief word about brands. It's my favorite picture. This doesn't actually exist. This is someone on DeviantArt that created this, but how many of you actually would want this? Yeah, I thought so. One brave soul. Push over and over. But the idea, I mean, what happens to brands in all of this is they begin to sort of be outpaced and outstripped by data. If you are the delivery channel, if you are the company with the intelligence, then you can essentially go today to any number of OEMs and get a product developed that's good enough to deliver to the endpoint. You heard the videos the very first thing this morning. I don't care about brands. Brands aren't important to me. I just want the thing and I want it quickly. Think about a world where you basically have these sorts of buttons, but the brand really doesn't matter anymore. And what matters is the sort of insatisfaction of the person. What would you rather have? 2,000 square feet or square meters of prime retail location on a high street? Prime retail shelf space in a big box retailer somewhere? Saturation ad budgets? Or one well-placed sensor on the home, the body, or some other kind of key point of the person that you're trying to reach to find out what they want and understand how they want it delivered? We'll begin to sort of see more situations like this where, a brand may just be represented by a sensor hiding behind a tree somewhere, listening out, looking for your body language, trying to sort of find out what your intentions are, and then rapidly getting it to you, or hearing your voice, hearing conversations that you may or may not be, aware that you've opted into, interpreting those, analyzing them, and being able to kind of act on those to say, gosh, John looks sad today, or he's sounding kind of sad, maybe I should send him some antidepressants or chocolate or a bottle of wine. Or Jack Daniels. So for the retailer of the future, for the consumers of the future, this means more and more of our retail interactions are going to be performative. When you're surrounded by these kinds of sensing networks and data as the sort of interacting medium between you and the shopping, what does that do to you? How do you begin to behave if you know that these things are listening to you and acting on your intentions? Do you start to kind of mime and play out certain needs? Oh, I'm really hungry right now. I could love a pizza. Boom, there it is. We're gradually being drawn into a kind of weird affective labor in service of retail, where we're going to have to start performing more and more, not just buying and kind of responding, but performing our early stages of our interaction, sprinkling keywords into the conversations that we have, letting the machines know that we're actually interested in a particular product. And of course, this assumes a lot of these systems can accurately interpret our needs and identities. So far, the jury's out on this. So services like Twitter and Facebook, they're enabling these transactions. They're coaxing us into engagements with products and services that involve a kind of emotional performance. Similarly, like quantified self and behavioral measurement, these coaching milestones aren't necessarily making us healthier, but they're putting us on a literal hedonic treadmill to sort of act as a constant shopping, consuming animal. Invisible commerce will literally have us kind of miming, talking, jumping, playing for goods and services as a kind of physical retail therapy. In my data shadow, I have to go home now and retrain it to be legible in a world of Dutch and European commerce. I'll leave the American one parked over there right now, and I guess I need to figure out which objects in my house I need to go talk to. Do I need to go talk to the lamp and tell it I need a light bulb? Do I need to go yell into the toilet for more toilet paper? How do I sort of gesture, and how do I make an order? These sorts of things are going to be changing for us. Or meantime, I can just kind of lie back with my brainwave detecting headband and think about capitalism. Thank you.
not join me for a few minutes? Ooh, that went from a sort of a, advice to people in the shopping industry to a pretty dystopian view of, life in your own home. It was nice.
It was a positive view.
Of course, yes. What is the? I mean, Dash is probably the first example of this happening, right? This push button wherever you are, just order something.
But I think the strange thing about Dash is it's the last piece of retail before it disappears. Yeah. The idea of a button with a brand on it feels like the kind of miniaturization of the shelf experience. But I actually feel like it's going to kind of disappear, like the old TV screens used to go whoop at the end and disappear. That button will just kind of go. And in place, there's you standing with the washing machine going, damn it, I'm out of Tide now, or I'm out of whatever the brand is. And that's the interaction.
Now, I want to ask two things. One is, you talked about this, the databases between the sellers, basically, the e-commerce, the retailers, and the buyers. But of course, the whole world behind it, where the stuff actually gets made, is also, of course, now working with these algorithms and predictions and analysis. And I mean, it's not just that you think of it and you can order it and it will come to your door, but you will think of it and somebody will decide, I have to make this. I mean, there's a pretty interesting article about one guy in New York he's called the Amazon Whisperer. If you look it up, you will find him. He just goes by the commands and requests and searches and said, oh, apparently there's a lot of people around that want this thing without a strap but with 2 buttons, and he will make it. Did you see any of that in your research for this talk about the prediction at the manufacturing side of things?
I think one of the interesting things, we've seen this happen, for example, in the electronics business over the past, I would say, sort of 7 or 8 years. There's so many new mobile phone brands on the market now that didn't exist before. And that's partly because the OEMs, the equipment manufacturers, the factories back in China or Vietnam or wherever the sort of electronics are being manufactured, built enough knowledge of what the end user wanted that they could develop their own product and cut the high-end mobile phone brand out of the picture. That data is essentially going to be sold to the highest bidder. The lock-in, the relationship between the customer, the retailer, the logistics chain in the middle, and the supplier kind of becomes much more open to anyone to step into it. Yeah, I mean, basically, when I could have put up an animation. When you push a dash button somewhere, a chemical comes out of pipe into a lake in China. Somewhere someone hears a buzz and wakes up in a factory and quickly starts packaging that thing. If you've had the experience of watching your MacBook or iPad get shipped to you, you see the shipping chain, that it starts in Shenzhen and makes its way to Alaska if it's going to North America. And I think what becomes kind of interesting and evident through that is the depth of that sort of supply chain. So the ability to actually get a manufacturer and a relationship on the fly and quickly compile a product in the same way that we would roll software or build an app.
So the new relationship will be rather manufacturer-buyer than
I think it collapses those, a lot of the middlemen disappear as have happened in a lot of things, but I was walking through the city yesterday thinking, this is really just a throwback to the 1900s, the early 1900s, where the greengrocer didn't have necessarily fixed contracts with a melon warehouse in Namibia, but they knew on a day-to-day basis who had the freshest fruit.
Yeah, they sourced
what you liked
instantly.
And when they saw you come in, they'll be, hey Monique, I've got the thing you wanted.
Okay.
So.
Let me see, because we wanted to ask some of the people from the room to respond. Where's Daniel with? Yes.
Yeah, can we have some?
We're going to put some people on the spot here, right?
Yeah, can
because
we have some house lights?
I actually noticed quite a few retailers in the audience because I checked the list. So, but let me see if we can find somebody.
Is there somebody in e-commerce here? Who's in e-commerce?
There was that guy.
He's
gone now.
Nobody wants to stand up.
Laurent, you ran him off.
Nobody wants to confess to be in e-commerce.
Okay, so who thinks that the future big e-commerce companies will be software companies, or who thinks there's a big future for the existing retailers and brands? So who feels confident that the existing retailers and brands stand a huge chance? Because as Laurent says, retail's not easy. There's a lot of knowledge there. All for the retailers here. There's somebody here. Nobody dares to say.
There's somebody
who thinks it will all be software anyway, and it's software companies that will rule this business?
Here's somebody who just
You all
raised.
have no opinion at all. Gosh.
You raised your hand very reluctantly. Hi.
Hi,
What's your name?
Robert.
Where are you working?
At 12 Apps Software.
So
And you believe in retail, right?
yeah. You believe in this retail thing?
I believe in the retail thing, yeah.
And do you believe that these retailers have to become software companies, just like we just heard?
Yeah, just like we heard yesterday as well, because all companies will be software companies eventually. But there will always be the brick and mortar business, I guess.
There always will be.
Yeah,
Because
but
my
they
guess-
have to find multi-channel solutions to it.
Because my guess was it is so costly, it was so expensive, that you would just try to cut out this middleman and have this as a luxury good, to have real people talking to you in person, not on an online chat. Don't you think?
That would be too expensive?
Yeah, maybe.
No, I don't think so. Because you can see it right now. I mean, when you look at groceries in Germany and you compare it to groceries in the US are much more expensive. And still in Germany you have people talking to you. There's not so many, but it doesn't get any cheaper than that.
And sometimes it's hard to talk to them, because they don't
Yeah.
like talking to them.
Okay. Well,
Thank you.
And I think
there's
it's never,
very different views here. in the
it's
world.
never a kind of completely, zero-sum choice
No.
of all retail disappears. I mean, this has been the discussion for 20 years now. Will brick and mortar disappear? It hasn't. Obviously, the city is full of brick and mortar. People want different kinds of experiences, but at a certain level and a certain scale, things are beginning to kind of collapse much more
it's
into
just that
data.
if you see this as a market where huge, the stakes are huge and there's big business interest vying for prime position in it, and my feeling would be that the guys with the artificial intelligence and the databases and the algorithms are like 10 steps ahead of the rest. But you never know. They might find a way
It's difficult to
cooperate.
recreate the kind of real human interaction and understanding that you have in the individual relationship between a shopkeeper
Yeah, that's true
and the
as well.
customer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.